Good evening. I'm Carolyn Rye, Chair of the School Board of the City of Virginia Beach, and I hereby call this meeting to order at 6 o'clock p.m. on this 27th day of April 2021. Pursuant to the state of emergency related to the COVID-19 pandemic, the governor's executive orders, the Virginia Freedom of Information Act as amended by the Virginia General Assembly, and the school board's April 7, 2020 emergency resolution, this workshop of the School Board of the City of Virginia Beach will be conducted in person for school board members and certain staff members. However, due to the necessary health mitigation strategies in place, it is impractical and unfeasible for the public to attend this meeting in person. Members of the public will be able to observe the school board meeting through live streaming on vbschools.com, broadcast on VBTV Channel 47, and on Zoom. Madam Clerk, would you please take the verbal roll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Present in school board chambers is Chairwoman Rye, Miss Melnick, Miss Felton, Miss Franklin, Miss Hughes, Miss Owens, Miss Riggs, and Miss Weems. Attending via Zoom is Miss Anderson, Miss Holtz, and Miss Manning.
Thank you. For the record, Ms. Holtz is in the building, participating via Zoom for health reasons, Mrs. Manning at home for health reasons, and Mrs. Anderson out of state due to family concerns. So would you now please all join me in a moment of silence? And please now stand as able for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so that leads to agenda item 7. We're skipping 6 tonight, correct, Madam Clerk?
That is correct. There are no awards or recognitions this evening.
All right, so asking if any modifications to the agenda. Okay, hearing none, motion to approve. Mrs. Riggs, and a second. Mrs. Melnick. All in favor, please show a raised hand.
Madam Chair, we have a unanimous vote.
Thank you all. That brings us to the superintendent's report. Dr. Spence.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, Madam Chairwoman and members of the board. You know, the month of May brings us many opportunities to honor our staff and students with several special days, weeks, and monthly recognitions. So here are a number of items of interest for you and our families to know. First, May is National Better Hearing and Speech Month. It's an opportunity to honor the work, dedication, and time spent by our hearing and speech professionals and teams across the division as they provide support, communication and speech assistance, and guidance to our students. This month's designation also aims to raise awareness for the many communication and speech disorders. So to all of our speech and hearing staff who work to meet each individual student's needs, let me say thank you. Did you know that May is also National Physical Fitness and Sports Month? This annual observance is a time to highlight the importance of staying active through sports and other fitness activities, and we hope you'll celebrate by recognizing the importance of physical activity for everyone, both in and out of school. To show us how you're staying healthy this May through physical fitness, tag us in your social media posts at VB Schools and using the hashtag VBMove. Next, I'm happy to recognize National Music Week, which takes place May 2nd through the 9th. The objective of this week is to create an understanding and appreciation of music and to focus on music as a dynamic means of communicating between people, as well as a channel for personal expression. I hope you'll join me in celebrating National Music Week next week. And we can't, of course, forget Teacher Appreciation Week, which is taking place May 3rd through the 7th. This year, of course, is especially notable due to the Herculean efforts of our educators that they've put forth during this global pandemic, both virtually and in person, in some instances, a mixture of both of those things. I know, like our school board, every day I'm amazed at the work they do to build relationships with their students and help them reach academic excellence. The drive, the tenacity, and the grit that I witness from our teachers is one of the many reasons that I'm honored to be superintendent in this school division. So teachers, we look forward to celebrating you next week, and we'll be making the big reveal of who our 2022 Citywide Teacher of the Year is, so stay tuned. On Friday, May the 7th, we will celebrate School Lunch Hero Day. This is a chance to showcase the different school nutrition professionals who make meals for every child, and to applaud all they've done to ensure our students get those meals they need so they can focus on learning. You know, between preparing healthy meals for our students, adhering to strict nutrition standards, navigating student food allergies, and offering service with a smile, school nutrition and food service professionals here in Virginia Beach are really heroes. These teams are unwavering in their creativity for meal distribution, meal prep, and food options. So thanks to each of you for your continued dedication to our students. And throughout this pandemic, as of today, our food services staff has prepared and served more than 6.5 million meals. And that really is truly heroes in my book. Next, I want to let everyone know of an upcoming Division Appreciation Day. On May the 11th, we will be celebrating Technology Support Appreciation Day. This past year, of course, as you all know, has highlighted the role technology professionals have played in helping all of us meet the challenges of a global pandemic. New technology solutions like virtual meeting platforms, new computers, virtual classroom management tools, all of these things have allowed us to find success in so many ways. And this inaugural Recognition Day will be used to celebrate division staff members who've worked diligently to offer technology support and assistance to our students and staff, allowing them to remain engaged in the work of VB Schools. To do this, share your photos, videos, and words of appreciation by tagging at VB Schools on social media and using the hashtag VB Tech Support Day. And finally, as a reminder, all Virginians 16 and older are now eligible for the COVID-19 vaccine. The state moved into phase 2 of the vaccination process earlier this month. In this new phase, Virginia's pre-registration website, vaccinate.virginia.gov, now has a link to the CDC's Vaccine Finder tool. That database allows you to search for available vaccine appointments at providers near you by entering your zip code. That platform will then direct you to each provider's scheduling system, whether that's a hospital, a pharmacy, or a mass vaccination site such as the FEMA clinic at the Military Circle Mall in Norfolk. It's important to note that at the Military Circle Mall, anyone 16 and over can get a COVID-19 vaccination if they are a Virginia resident. That clinic will even take walk-ups and does allow for on-site registration. Thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Spence. May is a busy month to recognize our staff in their various capacities. So encourage the public to think about ways that they can do likewise. Okay. Approval of meeting minutes are from our April 13th, 2021 regular school board meeting. Are there any modifications to the minutes as drafted by the clerk? Okay, hearing none, a motion to approve. Mrs. Franklin, and a second, Mrs. Felton. Please show your approval with raised hand.
Madam Chair, we have a unanimous vote.
Thank you. Okay, with no speakers tonight on agenda items, that brings us to our consent agenda, agenda item 11. The items presented as part of tonight's consent agenda include 1, recommendation of general contractor, or that would be A, and then 1A is SeaTac Elementary School roof replacement, 2A is First Colonial High School pedestrian easement, B, Technology and Career Education, Carl Perkins, School Year 22 grant, and C, our resolution for Teacher Appreciation Week, which, Mrs. Riggs, if you would go ahead and read that now, thank you.
Okay, Teacher Appreciation Week resolution, May 3rd through the 7th, 2021. whereas research shows that classroom teachers have significant impact on student achievement and success, and whereas teachers' efforts in planning, teaching, and assessing directly impact student growth, and whereas teachers work in collaboration with school administrators to engage families and the community to create challenging, authentic learning opportunities for children, and whereas the school board appreciates the hard work and time teachers dedicate to support student achievement both in and outside of the classroom, and whereas this dedication contributes to a strong, positive school culture, and whereas the school division has partnered with our parents and community members to express our appreciation for teachers through the hashtag Thank a Teacher campaign, and whereas the school division uses this campaign to highlight the work of our extraordinary instructional staff throughout the entire school year, but especially during Teacher Appreciation Week. Now therefore be it resolved that the School Board of the City of Virginia Beach officially recognizes May 3rd through 7th, 2021 as Teacher Appreciation Week, and be it further resolved that the School Board of the City of Virginia Beach encourages all community members to support and participate in activities designed to recognize teachers for their tireless work as educational leaders, and be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution be spread across the official minutes of this board, and be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution be distributed to each school in the division to be posted in a prominent location, adopted by the School Board of the City of Virginia Beach this 27th day of April, 2021.
Thank you. So the chair will now entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. Mrs. Melnick, a second. Mrs. Felton, all in favor, please show a raised hand.
Madam Chair, we have a unanimous vote.
Thank you. Agenda item 12, action. The first action item, right now the only action item of the evening, is the personnel administrative appointments previously shared. We'll start with motion to approve. Ms. Owens, and a second, Mrs. Hughes. Okay. Any discussion? All right, hearing none, please show your approval with a raised hand.
Madam Chair, we have a unanimous vote.
Thank you. And this would be the time for Dr. Spence. Do you have an appointment or
Yes,
two
ma'am,
to
I do.
share? Thank you.
I'd like to begin by recognizing Andrew Drew Midget. Mr. Midget has been serving in Virginia Beach as a teacher at Larkspur Middle School, as a teacher at Kempsville High School. Most recently, he's been school improvement specialist at Kempsville High School, and I'm pleased this evening the board has accepted our recommendation for him to serve as the next assistant principal at Plaza Middle School. And then I'd like to recognize Richard Plank. Mr. Plank has served across a number of different institutions, but most recently in Virginia Beach as a teacher at Bayside Middle School. He's now serving as an administrative assistant at Bayside Middle School, and we're pleased this evening you've accepted our recommendation for Mr. Plank to serve as the next Dean of Students at Bayside Middle School. Congratulations to both of these gentlemen, and we will be, again, recognizing them at a future meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Spence. All right, information portion of our agenda. We begin tonight with interim financial statements through March 2021, and welcome, Ms. Pate.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairwoman Rye, Vice Chairwoman Melnick, school board members, Dr. Spence. As of March 31st, the overall revenue trend remains acceptable at this point in the fiscal year, as illustrated in our first graph. Last month, we reported to the board a projected surplus in state revenue of $5.5 million, using the most recent local projection of our ADM at the end of February of 63,480 students. Unofficially, our preliminary March 31st ADM is coming in at 63,452 students, which is 325 students below the state's projection and only 28 students less than our previous local projection. So based on this preliminary March 31st ADM and the final budget actions by the General Assembly, our revised projection of state revenue is a projected surplus of approximately $5.4 million. Last year, we received notification of the final state payments and an updated calc tool from the Virginia Department of Education around the first week of June, and expect the timeline for this year to be the same. Federal revenues continue to show favorable trend as of the end of March. Year to date, we have received approximately $1.6 million over our budget. This is mainly due to impact aid payments. We also received notification of 2 additional impact aid payments to be received, totaling approximately $1.1 million, and that will put us at approximately $2.7 million over budget year to date. This next graph shows that sales tax receipts are at an acceptable level. Year to date through March, we are approximately $2.7 million higher than the same time last year. And for April, we are showing an increase in sales tax receipts from April of last year of approximately $363,000. And the last graph shows that our expenditures and encumbrances trend is also acceptable at this point in the fiscal year. So that concludes the presentation. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Can we check on Mrs. Holtz if her hand, the raised hand is intentional or not? Okay. All right. No, thank.
So you want my hand up there?
You
have a question?
Okay, just wanted to clarify, no question now.
Thank you.
And now we welcome Mr. Hunsaker, our Chief Financial Officer. The annual general fee schedule is up for renewal, discussion for fiscal year 21-22. Welcome.
Good evening, Chairman Rye, Chairwoman Rye, Vice Chair Melnick, school board members, and Dr. Spence. I'm going to make it real simple for you tonight. The general fees, they're 4 pages, and you will note that with the exception of 2 items on those 4 pages, we're holding the fees to the same amount that the fees are this year. So we are not going to raise meal fees. We're not going to raise tuition fees. There are 2 items. One of them is about 2/3 of the way down on the first page. It's the online HPE 10 Virginia Driver's Ed Traffic Safety. That will be an increase in that cost. We have no control over that because that's a vendor increase. So that would be the exception in that we don't have the ability to hold the prices on that one. The second one is on the second page, and it's listed as adult student licensed practical nursing. There's a $58 increase, and that's to cover the ATI testing. Again, we don't control the cost of that. And with those explanations, that's my presentation. We're holding the prices, the fees on everything except those 2 items. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, starting with Ms. Owens. And thank you, Mr. Hunsaker.
Yep, thank you. And I'm not sure that this is necessarily a question with the fees per se, but with our CARES Act and different funding that we received for the summer school fees, is there an option for families to apply for grant or assistance for this year's summer school, particularly with the economic things that we are
There's
facing?
always that option for certain families, yes.
Okay. That's all I wanted to make sure that we are putting out for families. Thank you.
Well,
Well, if I may piggyback on that, we're distinguishing between I don't know if the right terminology is voluntary summer school versus recommended summer school due to pandemic learning loss, or maybe it's Dr. Spence. I'm not doing a good job with this question, but Miss Owens' question prompted mine.
Yeah, no, I understand the question. Our intention is to, in most of the instances of the summer programming that we talked about that are related to pandemic learning loss, is to waive the tuition. And we'll be communicating about all that, and we'll make sure we get a memo together for you to answer that question precisely about where tuition may be charged and where it won't be.
Thank you. Anybody else on any other item here? So we'll be seeing this again in 2 weeks on consent, yes, sir? So there's time in between.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
So welcome, Ms. Linetti, our school board attorney, here to discuss superintendent evaluation instrument and the superintendent's summative performance evaluation process.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, school board members, and Dr. Spence. I'm Cami Linetti, and on behalf of the School Board Governance Committee, I'm going to present both of these topics to you. They're sort of related, so we may be jumping between the two topics. The first one is the superintendent's evaluation instrument, and I'm going to clarify for you. It's going to seem a little confusing at the moment. We are bringing to you changes that will apply on the evaluation for this year. So when you are doing the superintendent's summative evaluation in June, all this instrument that we're asking you tonight is that instrument that you will be using to judge him for next year. We are going to be coming back to you next month with recommendations for the instrument that will go into place in July 1. It's a little confusing, but remember, tonight all we're going to be talking about are the changes that we are proposing for this year's instrument. And Dr. Spence is almost at the end of his year anyway, so to understand where you are. Mrs. Williams worked with this, Mr. Edwards worked extensively with this, and Dr. Spence knows a lot about that, so I will bring that. The other piece I'm going to talk to you about is the summative performance evaluation process. Last year we did a process for you. We've never formally adopted it, so we're going to bring that back to you. I'm actually going to flip it and talk about that process first so you understand it. One of the things that your governance committee's primary responsibilities is dealing with the superintendent and the superintendent's evaluation instrument. If you remember back in 2010-11 time period, there were new rules that came out. I know that time Mr. Edwards works extensively on adopting a superintendent's evaluation instrument that was consistent with the requirements that the Virginia Board of Education put out. They're fairly extensive. You actually, as a school board, adopted that particular instrument, and that has been the instrument that you have used for the last couple of years and the last couple of superintendents. We've looked at it, and after going through the process last year, for those of you on the governance committee, we talked essentially about what was working in the process. We tried things differently last year to see how they worked, and then we were going to come back together, and we were going to evaluate how that process worked on there and whether we wanted to formalize the process. As portion of going through that process, we realized that there were things in the superintendent's summative evaluation instrument that could be done better, consolidated better. So this last year, the governance committee has been looking again at that process. These recommendations are coming to you out of what the governance committee worked on. So first of all, just to talk about the process, one of the things you have to do is you have to complete the superintendent's summative evaluation process at the end of the year by June 30. For those of you who've done that, you know that this is a very complicated process. It takes a lot of time. Often it's many, many hours that we're putting into this, so it's important that you time that. One of the things that the governance committee realized is we weren't always formally setting aside enough time to do a good job with the superintendent's evaluation process. So we developed the superintendent's evaluation process, which is kind of like a timeline for you to keep you on schedule. Last year we adopted late. We adopted late in May. We were not able to stay on that time period. We were very close to it, but we weren't able to do it last year. This year that we're asking, after looking at it again, we decided that the process and the timing worked pretty well, and we're going to ask you to formally adopt this evaluation process. So Nana, can you put some of the things that are important in this are the dates, what you'll do and let's change. In the future, by May 15th, the superintendent will submit to you, the school board members, his self-evaluation instrument. The superintendent has the right to request a closed meeting with the school board to discuss it. You've done this in the past. If he's to do that, he needs to do it by June 1st. Then by June 15th, the school board chair and vice chair are going to meet with the superintendent prior to that, anytime prior to that, to go over the written summative evaluation. And then the end, by June 30th, the school board will then meet in closed session no later than June 30th to discuss and make a formal vote on the summative evaluation. One of the things that the superintendent's contract has is he's entitled to certain types of payments based on it. If you fail to make that decision by June 30th, he automatically gets the full amount on that. So that is one of the reasons we've always timed it to make sure you complete that process and stay on schedule with the recommended process by June 30th. So by July 1, the superintendent will be starting on his new evaluation year. To get all of that work done, it's important that you stay on schedule. So what we did with this process, and you saw this last year, we talked to you about where you could find the information on how the superintendent's evaluation instrument is done. We also talked about the timelines. We also spelled out for you the difference between performance ratings. Mrs. Turner, can you get the next one? Thank you. So in this particular document, it defines that ratings are at the performance standard level, not at the performance indicator level. For those of you who have the instrument in front of you, you'll see that on there. We talked about what data sources were going to be appropriate to use. We also talked about the evaluation would be based on events that happened during this past fiscal year. And then we also talked about school board members are going to prepare their individual drafts, which means you have to plan, you have to complete your individual draft of the summative evaluation, not that you necessarily have to turn it in, but you have to prepare it before the school board comes to evaluate. If you go back to the timeline, you're going to see that early in June, you need to meet and you need to finalize it before the end of June, which means you need to plan in your schedule each year to have sufficient time to complete the summative evaluation process. It also talks about the rating systems. It defines what the standards are. It also knows that the final summative evaluation rating is determined by those school board members present. So if you are not able to make it to the closed session when you meet on this, you can turn in your information, but you will not be voting on that. You need to be present to vote on this. All that is spelled out. Again, it's only a 2-page document on there. We decided that we were going to recommend to you on behalf of the governance committee that you adopt this process every year so that you know to plan for your schedule, that you know when you're going to have to do the work. The superintendent knows when he has to bring the work in. Does anyone have any questions on the process? Again, our recommendation to you will be to vote on this. I'm going to turn it back now to the superintendent's evaluation instrument. Again, I think Ms. Williams and Dr. Spence are better qualified to speak to how the changes came about on that, but just for your purposes, the Virginia Department of Education sets forth 7 standards that are listed up on the screen for you. Within each one of the standards, there are performance indicators. One of the things that the governance committee did a lot of work on this year was try to eliminate the repetitive nature. If you notice, certain topics we kept talking about kept showing up in all 7. So you were continually rating the superintendent on the same topic. Superintendent did a lot of work with Mr. Edwards and Mrs. Weems. They presented that to the governance committee. They are going to be bringing you some of those indicators. You will see those in here. And I don't know, Dr. Spence, if you want to talk about some of the changes you made to the instrument.
Yes, ma'am. I won't get too into the specific details, but what I'll say is, again, working at that time with Mr. Edwards and Ms. Weems, we did a crosswalk of the standards, and as Ms. Linetti referred to, there was a lot of redundancy. So there were, in fact, a number of indicators that actually repeated themselves over several standards. And the feedback that I think was discussed in governance was that it was difficult to know how, like, do you get rated the same time, over and over again because of the redundancy. And so the effort was made to both reduce the total number of indicators and eliminate that redundancy in doing that. And so now I think if you read it and you compare it to the previous instrument, you'll see that pretty readily. I mean, some of the standards before had up to like 10 to 15 indicators. Now they're all down to no more than 4. Some of them have subsets, but they're about 4 indicators, and then individual subsets of a few of those. And I think as you read through it, and again, if you have the old document, or if you'd like to get that, you can do a comparison. You'll see they've just been put in places where they make more sense. It's just to help make it easier to understand what each of the standards is. What hasn't changed is the standard. We should probably be clear about that. All of the standards are the same. So there's 7 standards. They're aligned to the state's recommendations for standards, and frankly aligned to administrative and teaching standards in most respects. And so, and the other thing that hasn't changed in the instrument is the weighting of those standards. I'll mention that there was some discussion at the governance level about that, but because that wasn't happening until after the middle of the year, then the decision the governance committee made was to leave this year's weighting in place and then have a discussion about an instrument for next year that may change the weighting, reflective of some guidelines that have come out from the state around changing the weighting. So I don't know, Mrs. Weems, if you wanted to add to that. I don't have the crosswalk document in front of me, but if the board really wants to walk through detail by detail, I'm happy to just follow up with any individual board member by phone, and I can share that crosswalking with you.
I mean, no, that's pretty much it, because if you remember when we evaluate Dr. Spence, a lot of us are like, wait, that was already evaluated in a number 3, or no, I put that as number 5, you know. So we really just streamlined it and made it a lot more user-friendly and just cleaned it up. It's a lot, in my opinion, a lot better document and instrument to use.
We took a lot of the notes from your last meeting, and all of us talked about it, what was working, what's not working. So we think this is a better document for you. It more accurately reflects and help you keep track of the different sections on it. The instrument is very good. If you've not looked at this instrument before, it really spells out very well what the performance standard is. It's very well set out, the indicators. It also talks about each standard explains what exemplary, proficient, developing need means, and unacceptable means for you. There are good explanations at the beginning how you do the rating system. It's a very good instrument to do. I think it's a much more streamlined, makes more sense. We also included some areas that weren't as well spelled out that you mentioned to us in the last performance evaluation process, and we think this instrument looks pretty good for you. We don't think there are any need to do any extra changes at this point. But Ms. Tony, will you move to the next slide, please? Just for your purposes, and on the ratings evaluation instrument, if you take a look at number 3 on that page, it talks about how the rating scales are. As Dr. Spence mentioned, there have been changes that have been recommended that you can adopt. But for this year, for FY21, which is this year, standards 1 through 5 and standard 7 are weighted at 1.5. Standard 6, you've weighted at 1. That has been what the instrument has been for as long as you've had it in place. On there, we will be coming back with you.
Ms. Linetti, I'm sorry, that's not
Is that
accurate.
the wrong one?
Yeah,
It's
that's actually,
The
I think
four.
what's proposed for next
I'm
year.
sorry,
Yeah,
I did
that's
get ahead
okay.
of
No,
myself.
this year, it's actually standards 1 through 6 are weighted at 1,
Okay.
and standard 7 is weighted at 4.
I apologize. I got ahead of myself
Yeah, no,
on
that's
this
okay.
one. You've seen this in your calculations on there. That is, the major difference will be coming back to you next month unless you propose some other changes for next year will be to change that weighting system. But to try to keep it clear, tonight you will only be voting on the summative evaluation performance standards. What you're changing on this time is the indicators under there, not the weighting system. So that's all you're going to be changing right now. And again, we felt that because we were almost at the end of the year and we're proposing, it wasn't fair to Dr. Spence to do that so he could prepare for next year doing that. So with that, Madam Chair, we can answer questions for you, or we propose you will need to vote twice. One will be on the instrument and one will be on the process.
So to remind my colleagues, or at least to acknowledge my email from last evening, why I did want to single this out in particular, because ideally, I would like to introduce a motion to vote on these later in the evening, agenda item 19, so that we can be aligned with the timeline of the process document, and technically it begins with May 1st, on the very first number 1 of the document, and that is the date that the clerk would officially send to us the instrument, so that we can, a reminder to refresh our memories on it, to become familiar with it, so that we're prepared by May 15th with the superintendent input to actually spend those next 2 weeks with our own personal thoughts and comments that would then be ultimately shared with the board at the first meeting in June. But I do first want to, so maybe I'll ask for a motion in a second, then we'll see if there's further discussion or questions.
Madam Chair, Ms. Manning has her hand raised.
Okay, so let's first, I'll first introduce the motion for discussion, that I move that we,
What did you take 13C first, which is superintendent's evaluation instrument for FY21, the amendments?
I move that we Information item C, superintendent evaluation instrument for fiscal year 21 amendments, that we move that to agenda item 19, vote on remaining action items to vote on later in the evening. So is Ms.
Anderson,
Okay, we're for,
second that.
okay, well, we needed okay, so that was my motion and a second. Okay, now discussion, and we said that Mrs. Manning?
Okay, yeah, so we had already approved the agenda. We can make that change now. That wasn't my question initially, but
You can move to further action items on there. Item.
okay, it just seems odd that we approved the agenda and now we're changing it. We normally change it in the beginning, don't we?
You're correct.
Governance meeting, I'm trying to remember why we ended with this plan, and Mrs. Linetti, you're saying,
I think because the governance committee we did not have an intervening meeting that we could have put it on information for you. Our concern when looking at this is to get you the actual instrument you'll be using this year. You needed to adopt it. And to adopt the process, we had the process from last year, but last year's process was entitled FY20 process. So we felt as a governance committee, we present this on information, but to stay on track with the May 1st deadline for the new instrument, that we would ask you if you would move it to an action item, but it has not been on information yet because we have not approved it.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I just didn't realize that we could do that in our rules or in Robert's rules, that once you've already approved the agenda, then you can change the agenda during the meeting.
If you make that motion, you've got a full.
So my overall question, it's very difficult for me to hear you, Miss Linetti, so therefore I think it's probably difficult for the public to hear you. It's very, very muffled. So while I was picking up words here and there, it was really hard to hear. So I just I'm not certain because I don't have what the evaluation was before and what the new recommendation, what are the changes on what we're going to be voting on?
Itself, this time, if you look under performance standards, it is indices. So if it's performance standard 3, instructional leadership, under where it would say 3.1, 3.1A, 3.B, those have been amended on there. That is what's changing on this instrument.
On 3 only?
Most, I'm not sure if I have the cross-reference for it, but most of the performance standards they've realigned the indices that are under. So what's in the top of the document where it's in the bolded and the darker color says performance standard 5, performance standard 6, it's the indices under that have been realigned. The definition of the standards, the titles of the standards have not been changed.
I understand you. Can maybe somebody else,
Annie and my colleagues, if you look at your handout or your computer screen, the performance standards, there's 7. Those remain the same. What we did, like performance standard 1, mission, vision, and goals.
Page 4.
Page 4. Last year, that standard, I don't remember, but it probably had about 9 or 10, 11 or 12 indices under it. Same with performance standard 2, planning and assessment. It probably had 8 to 12 indices under it. Several of these were repeated throughout the document, like they would be under performance standard 2, and almost the identical wording would be under performance standard 6. Or I'm just throwing those out as an example. So what we did was we went through all of the performance standards one by one, then we went through all the indices and we cross-checked ones that were pretty much the same. They just may have been worded a little differently. And then we questioned some that maybe they better fit under a different standard. So we basically just went through there were probably 70 or 80, around 80 indices, and we've really streamlined it to about 30, 35. Because we just felt like it was just repeated.
Kind of streamlined it to combine any repetition.
Yeah, we combined, we threw out some, we combined any repetition, we streamlined it all because it was really very confusing for many of us when we went to evaluate Dr. Spence, that we were seeing so much repeat, and a lot of us would say, well, I evaluated him on that under standard 2, but somebody else evaluated him on that same thing under standard 6 or 7. So so the standards are staying the same. Everything is the same except for the indices under the standard, and I think this way is a lot easier to understand and a lot streamlined.
Thank you very much.
And if I could add to that, in the end, no particular criteria was eliminated. They were compressed or consolidated. So we didn't throw out.
The only ones that were really eliminated were where it was almost an exact repeat of another indicator.
Anybody else? All right, then if we could, oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Hughes.
That's okay. I think what Miss Manning's initial question was, why didn't you bring this up when we were asking for additions or changes to the agenda, which actually I get that. That's a legitimate question. As far as the voting on this goes, I just want to be clear. If we're doing 2 votes, one is on content and one is whether or not to keep the summative process. Is that correct?
Right now, the vote is to move it to further action item, to vote on it at the end, to actually take an action tonight. Because right now, this is on the information agenda.
No, I get that. But
And then-
when we do vote, whether it's tonight or the next meeting, those will be the 2 things we're...
Yes, instrument and process.
Yes.
Well, just for clarity to the question, it's not a question of whether or not you have a summative evaluation process. That's required by my contract. So it's a function of what the process looks like. That's what you're really voting on.
In particular, this process, you set out dates that you will intend to keep. That is not laid out by the law on there. This one on the process kind of sets out May 1st, the May 15th date, and the time periods by which you will get back to the superintendent. That's the difference. That's not out in the law.
Oh, okay. I mean, I tend to agree with updating this because a lot of it was redundant. This last time, the way we did it, we kind of voted on what answers to include, so I didn't really care for that. But it seems like I'd read in the agenda that was part of, we were deciding whether or not to keep that. Was I mistaken?
To keep the process or keep the indices?
No, to keep the way that, the way we did the evaluation last year was different than what we did before, because we kind of picked and chose what to include by vote as opposed to everybody's counting.
The evaluation process itself does lay out how you will, in like section 7, if you can't reach a decision, how you're going to vote on it. If you can't reach a consensus, that is laid out a little bit in the document.
But can we stay focused on this one, or it's going to get too, I mean, we're happy to continue, but we have this motion on the floor for the instrument right now. Can we at least vote on this, whether the motion is to vote on it, to place it in agenda item 19 for a formal vote later in the meeting? So with that, can we ask for a show of hands for approval first?
Madam Chair, we have a unanimous vote.
Okay, so that's,
And then your next motion
so
would be.
we're placing that on agenda item 18 for action. Madam Clerk?
19.
19? I'm sorry.
And then it'd be similar motion to take 13D, which is the actual process itself, and also move that as a further action item to be voted on by the school board. I guess that would be 19.
So I'll make that motion and, that the superintendent summative performance evaluation process, that it be, added to agenda item 19 for a formal vote later in the formal meeting. Do I have a second? Mrs. Franklin, discussion. I want to reiterate that this was the process, the same document as last year. It hasn't been changed. It's just that we're updating the title of it to make it a more permanent document, until it's further revised through more use. But with that, any questions or Mrs. Manning?
Yes, so just to be clear, Ms. Rye, you said the only change is
Just the title?
Yes, in terms of the document itself.
Last year, the title read Superintendent Summative Performance Process FY '20, because we weren't sure last year if we wanted to keep this process. So we're going to recommend that you just take off the FY '20, and this will be your process until change in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. All right, then a raised hand will show approval to vote on this later this evening.
Madam Chair, we have a unanimous vote.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Linetti. Standing committee reports. Ms. Owens.
Thank you. Just an update with the mental health task force. The task force met on Monday, which was yesterday. Myself and Mrs. Weems were in attendance. The task force is moving forward with collaborating with a lot of different partners at the table and are in the process now of starting to formulate some recommendations. This was our third meeting, and the goal was to try and wrap up in 4 meetings. We may or may not be able to be all the way wrapped up in 4 meetings, and so we're looking at that. We may end up doing 1 more meeting if needed to get things fully wrapped up and have recommendations ready to bring back to the board. But we are moving along well, with a lot of collaboration from a lot of community partners. And so I'm excited with the progress and hopefully some good recommendations coming to us before our summer retreat.
Okay. Thank you. Mrs. Holtz. Committee liaison.
Excuse me?
Is your hand raised for a committee or liaison report?
No, it's not.
Okay. On behalf of governance, I'll just, a friendly reminder for those of you not on the committee to please reach out with your commitment for the retreat in terms of having the third-party facilitator for the board self-eval. So I can follow up individually, but I'm just putting that out there. We've been there's been a lot on all our plates, so I do understand, but we do need a response, so I'll leave it at that. Anybody else? All right, then that concludes our formal meeting, and we will transition now to non-agenda speakers.